You forgot who owns this world.
That Tuesday morning started like any other. I was in my office on the 30th floor of downtown Seattle, going through quarterly financial reports with my third cup of black coffee, watching the city buzz with life 30 stories below. At 31 years old, I'd built something extraordinary from absolutely nothing, starting with a beat-up food truck I bought with my last $2,000 and transforming it into an empire worth more than most people could comprehend. But nobody in my personal life seemed to care about that part of my story, mainly because I'd never told them. My assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, cutting through my concentration. "Mr. Caldwell, there's a call from Rosewood Planning Wedding Coordinators on line 2. Her tone was professional as always, but I caught that slight hesitation that meant she wasn't sure if this was worth my time. I almost hit decline right then. Wedding planners weren't exactly my usual business contacts. Then it hit me. My sister-in-law Vanessa's wedding next month. She was marrying some hotshot cardiologist named Mitchell, and the whole family had been buzzing about it for months. More importantly, I'd quietly written a check for $50,000 to help cover the costs, because my wife Claire had come to me with tears streaming down her face, talking about how her family was financially strapped and couldn't afford the wedding Vanessa had always dreamed of. I'd written that check without thinking twice. No fanfare, no expectation of gratitude, no strings attached, just a quiet gesture from a guy who'd grown up with nothing in a trailer park outside Tacoma and understood what it meant to want something beautiful for the people you love. I'd specifically asked the wedding planner to keep my contribution anonymous. Sometimes the best gifts are the ones nobody knows you gave. "Put them through," I told my assistant, straightening my tie and settling back into my leather chair. The Seattle skyline stretched out before me through floor-to-ceiling windows, a concrete jungle I'd learned to navigate and eventually conquer. "Ethan Caldwell speaking," I said into the phone, using the same tone I'd use for any business call. Professional, direct, no nonsense. The voice on the other end was female, probably mid-30s, with that particular blend of nervousness and professionalism that told me this wasn't going to be a routine conversation. "Mr. Caldwell, this is Diana from Rosewood Planning. I'm calling about the Stevens Blake wedding next month." She paused, and I could practically hear her choosing her words carefully. "I'm afraid I have some rather uncomfortable news to share with you." My gut clenched. In my experience, when people started conversations with phrases like uncomfortable news, somebody was about to get screwed over, and it usually wasn't the person making the call. I'd heard those words plenty of times in business, right before a partner tried to snake a deal or a competitor attempted a hostile takeover. "Go ahead," I said, keeping my voice level. I'd learned long ago that showing emotion in these situations was like showing your cards in poker. It never ended well. "Well, sir, your wife contacted us yesterday with some specific requests regarding the guest arrangements." Another pause, longer this time. "She requested that your name be removed from the guest list entirely. She also inquired about whether the $50,000 deposit you provided could remain with us, given that the funds have already been allocated to various vendors." The words hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral, staring out at the city below. Cars moved like ants along the streets, people going about their business completely unaware that my world had just shifted on its axis. I'd been removed from my own sister-in-law's wedding, the wedding I'd bankrolled out of love and generosity. They'd taken my money and kicked me to the curb like some unwanted party crasher. I felt that familiar coldness settle over me, the same ice-cold calm that had helped me close billion-dollar deals and survive in a business world that ate nice guys for breakfast. It was the kind of calm that made smart people nervous and stupid people overconfident. "I see," I said finally, my voice carrying none of the rage that was building in my chest like a pressure cooker. "And did my wife provide any reasoning for this request?" "She mentioned something about wanting to avoid potential drama and keeping the celebration focused on the happy couple," Jennifer replied, clearly uncomfortable with having to relay this message. "She assured us that you would understand and that the financial contribution was intended as a gift regardless of your attendance." A gift. 7 years of marriage, and my wife thought she could erase me from a family celebration like I was some embarrassing relative who drank too much at parties. The woman who'd cried in my arms about her family's financial struggles, who'd begged me to help make her sister's day special, had just stabbed me in the back with a smile. I took a deep breath, feeling the familiar weight of power settling around my shoulders like an expensive suit. There was something almost poetic about this moment. The quiet guy they'd all underestimated was about to remind them exactly who they were dealing with. "Cancel the entire wedding," I said calmly, as if I was ordering lunch instead of dropping a nuclear bomb on what was supposed to be the happiest day of two people's lives. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that I almost wondered if the call had dropped. Then I heard Diana's sharp intake of breath, followed by what sounded like papers rustling frantically. "I'm sorry, Mr. Caldwell, but I don't think I understand. You want to cancel your attendance?" "No," I replied, leaning back in my chair and allowing myself the smallest of smiles. "I want you to cancel the entire wedding, all of it. Every vendor, every service, every reservation, cancel it all." "But sir," she stammered, "you're not the groom. I don't have the authority to—" "Actually," I interrupted, my voice still perfectly calm, "I think you'll find that you do." The stunned silence on the other end of the line was absolutely delicious. I could practically hear Diana's brain scrambling to process what I'd just told her, probably flipping through contracts and vendor agreements like her life depended on it. "You're absolutely right, Diana," I said, letting a hint of amusement creep into my voice. "I'm not the groom, but here's the thing that nobody in my wife's family seems to understand. I don't need to be the groom to control this entire situation." I could hear her breathing quicken on the other end of the line, probably sensing that she was about to learn something that would flip her world upside down. "Let me paint you a picture, Diana. You work for Rosewood Planning, correct? Nice company. Been around for about 8 years now. Specializes in high-end celebrations for Seattle's elite families." I paused. "Well, here's something that might interest you. Rosewood Planning is owned by a larger company called Premier Events Group, which handles event planning and hospitality services throughout the Pacific Northwest. And Premier Events Group falls under the umbrella of my holding company, Caldwell Enterprises, which means, technically speaking, you work for me." The gasp that came through the phone was so sharp I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But then I remembered my wife's smug expectation that I'd just accept being uninvited while they kept my money, and any sympathy I might have felt evaporated like morning mist. "Oh my God!" she breathed, and I could hear papers rustling frantically in the background. She was probably pulling up corporate documents, trying to verify what I'd just told her. "But wait, there's more," I continued. "The venue where this wedding is supposed to take place, Lakeside Manor. That gorgeous property with the gardens and the waterfront view that Vanessa's been gushing about for months. Yeah, that's mine too. I bought it 3 years ago through a subsidiary called Northwest Properties. Beautiful place, isn't it?" More silence. Complete, total silence. I imagined Diana sitting at her desk, staring at her computer screen in horror as she realized the full scope of what she was dealing with. "And since we're on the topic," I continued, "let's talk about Pinnacle Catering, the company that's supposed to be handling the reception dinner, the one with the award-winning chef and the 5-star reputation. I own that too. Bought them out 2 years ago when they were struggling with debt. Turned them into one of the most sought-after catering companies on the West Coast." I stood up and walked over to my window, looking down at the city that had taught me everything I knew about power, money, and the importance of keeping your cards close to your chest. "Oh, and Harbor View Hotels," I added, almost as an afterthought. "That's the hotel chain where all 120 wedding guests have their reservations, right? The beautiful historic property downtown with the marble lobby and the panoramic city views. Guess what? That's part of my portfolio too. I acquired the entire chain last year when they were expanding into the Pacific Northwest market." The sound that came through the phone wasn't quite a sob, but it wasn't far off. I just systematically dismantled this woman's understanding of the situation, revealing that every single vendor, every venue, every service provider connected to this wedding ultimately answered to me. "So you see, Diana," I said, my voice returning to that calm, professional tone that had served me so well in boardrooms and negotiation tables. "While I may not be the groom, I am quite literally the foundation that this entire celebration is built on. Every contract traces back to me. Every service provider works for companies I own. Every reservation was made at properties I control." I could hear her breathing heavily now, probably trying to figure out how to handle a situation that wasn't covered in any wedding planning manual. "Send cancellation notices to all vendors immediately," I instructed, my voice now carrying the unmistakable authority of a man who was used to being obeyed without question. "Refund any deposits that the guests paid directly. and bill my wife's family for the remaining balance of all services minus the $50,000 I'm keeping as a cancellation fee for their disrespect. Mr. Caldwell, she whispered, are you sure about this? I smiled, though she couldn't see it. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. After I hung up with Diana, I sat back in my chair and let out a long breath I didn't even realize I'd been holding. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Here I was, a guy worth more than $2 billion, and my own wife's family had spent the last 7 years treating me like I was some kind of charity case who'd lucked into marrying above his station. The thing is, I'd never told Claire or her family who I really was. Not completely, anyway. When people asked what I did for a living, I'd just say I ran a small business and leave it at that. It wasn't exactly a lie. Caldwell Enterprises had started small, just me and a beat-up food truck I'd bought with my last $2,000 after dropping out of law school. But somewhere along the way, that little business had grown into something that would make most Fortune 500 CEOs weep with envy. I'd never felt the need to brag about it. Money talks, but wealth whispers, and I'd always preferred the whisper approach. Maybe it was because I'd grown up dirt poor in that trailer park, watching my mom work 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. When you've been hungry, really hungry, not just I skipped lunch hungry, you learn that flashy displays of wealth are usually just insecurity wearing a designer suit. But Claire's family had never learned that lesson. They were middle-class folks who'd built their entire identity around keeping up appearances and making sure everyone knew exactly where they stood in the social pecking order, and in their minds, I was definitely at the bottom of that order. Take Mitchell, for instance, Vanessa's fiancé and the golden boy of the family. Dr. Mitchell Blake, with his perfectly styled hair, his BMW, and his habit of mentioning his medical degree in casual conversation like it was some kind of magic spell that made everyone automatically respect him. The guy made decent money, sure. Probably pulled in around $300,000 a year, which isn't pocket change by any stretch. But compared to what I was sitting on, he might as well have been flipping burgers. Yet every family dinner, every holiday gathering, every casual get-together inevitably turned into the Mitchell Appreciation Hour. Did you hear? Mitchell just bought a new house. Mitchell's getting promoted to chief of cardiology. Mitchell's so stable and successful. Vanessa's so lucky. And then there was me, sitting quietly at the end of the table like some kind of furniture that everyone had gotten used to ignoring. The guy who showed up in jeans and a button-down shirt while Mitchell was sporting his designer threads. The guy who drove a 5-year-old Ford F-150 instead of a luxury sedan. The guy who never talked about work because, honestly, what was I supposed to say? Oh, I just closed a deal to acquire a hotel chain in Vancouver. How was your day? Gregory and Linda, Claire's parents, had made their feelings about me crystal clear from day one. They'd never said it outright. They were too polite for that. But the message came through loud and clear in 1,000 little ways. The way Gregory would talk business with Mitchell at dinner while completely ignoring me. The way Linda would gush about Mitchell's achievements while giving me these sympathetic little smiles like I was some kind of wounded puppy she felt sorry for. I'll never forget this one dinner about 2 years ago. We were all sitting around their dining room table, and Gregory was going on and on about Mitchell's latest promotion. Finally, he turned to me with this condescending smile and said, well, Ethan, at least Vanessa's marrying someone stable. Someone with real prospects, you know? The implication was clear as day. Unlike you, the guy who married our other daughter and clearly peaked in high school. I just nodded and said something non-committal about Mitchell being a good guy, which he actually was, despite his family's annoying habit of treating him like the second coming. But that comment had stuck with me, eating away at my gut like acid. At least Vanessa's marrying someone stable. As if I was some kind of deadbeat who couldn't provide for his wife. Some loser who'd somehow conned their precious daughter into settling for less than she deserved. The truth was, I'd been supporting Claire financially for years without making a big deal about it. When she wanted to go back to school to get her master's degree, who paid for it? Me. When her car died and she needed a replacement, who cut the check? Me. When she decided she wanted to start her own little boutique business that never quite got off the ground, who funded that pipe dream? Me. Every single time. It was me writing the checks and telling her not to worry about paying me back because we were married, and what was mine was hers. I'd done it all quietly, without fanfare, because that's what you do for the people you love. You take care of them, and you don't make them feel small about needing help. But apparently, taking care of your family financially doesn't count as being stable if you do it without bragging about it every 5 minutes. I was still sitting there, processing the nuclear bomb I just dropped on Diana and trying to figure out my next move, when my phone buzzed against my desk like an angry wasp. The screen lit up with Claire's name, and for just a split second, I felt that familiar flutter of hope in my chest. Maybe she was calling to apologize, to tell me there'd been some horrible misunderstanding, to explain that she'd never meant to cut me out of her sister's wedding like I was some kind of unwanted relative. But it wasn't a call, it was a text. And the moment I read those words, whatever small piece of my heart that still belonged to my wife of 7 years crumbled into dust. Please don't cause drama. You're not coming to Vanessa's wedding. We'll be keeping the money. You offered it as a gift anyway. Let's talk when you've calmed down. I stared at that message for a long time, reading it over and over again, each word hitting me like a physical blow. The casual dismissal of my feelings, the assumption that I was being dramatic for being hurt by their betrayal, the entitled way she talked about keeping my $50,000 like it was pocket change she'd found in the couch cushions. But what really got to me, what made something cold and hard settle in my chest like a stone, was that phrase, "Let's talk when you've calmed down." Like I was some kind of unhinged lunatic throwing a temper tantrum instead of a man who just discovered that his own wife had orchestrated his humiliation behind his back. Like my perfectly reasonable response to being erased from a family celebration I'd bankrolled was just some irrational emotional outburst that would pass once I came to my senses. I'd been with Claire for 7 years of marriage, 2 years of dating before that. 9 years of my life invested in this woman, and she thought she could just text me like I was some casual acquaintance she was blowing off for lunch plans. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got, not the hot, explosive kind of anger that makes you punch walls and say things you'll regret later. No, this was the cold, calculating kind of fury that had helped me crush competitors and close impossible deals. This was the kind of anger that didn't cloud your judgment. It sharpened it like a blade. Because here's what really hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just about Vanessa's wedding. This was about Claire, too. My wife, the woman who'd promised to love, honor, and cherish me until death do us part, had been the mastermind behind this whole thing. She wasn't some innocent bystander who'd gotten caught up in her family's drama. She was the one who'd called the wedding planner and asked to have my name removed from the guest list. She was the one who'd inquired about keeping my money while kicking me to the curb. I thought back to all those conversations we'd had about the wedding over the past few months. Claire coming to me with tears in her eyes, talking about how stressed Vanessa was, about how her parents were struggling financially, how heartbroken her sister would be if she couldn't have the wedding of her dreams. I'd written that check without hesitation because I'd thought I was helping my family. Our family. But apparently I'd been wrong about that our part. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Claire. "Ethan, I know you're upset, but please try to understand. This is Vanessa's day, and we can't have any family drama ruining it. You'll get over this." You'll get over this. Like being erased from my own family was just some minor inconvenience I'd eventually forget about. Like 7 years of marriage meant so little to her that she could just wave her hand and expect me to accept being treated like garbage. I deleted both messages without responding. There was nothing to say to her right now. Nothing that wouldn't make things worse than they already were. Besides, I had a feeling that very soon Claire was going to understand exactly what kind of drama her family had just invited into their lives. I didn't have to wait long to see the results of my handiwork. In the business world, I'd learned that information travels at the speed of panic, and wedding cancellations spread through family networks faster than wildfire through dry brush. The first call came exactly 45 minutes after I'd hung up with Diana. The caller ID showed Gregory Stevens, my father-in-law, the man who'd spent the better part of 7 years treating me like I was some kind of charity case his daughter had dragged home out of misplaced sympathy. I let it ring 3 times before picking up just to let him sweat a little. "Ethan?" His voice was tight with barely controlled panic, and I could hear Linda yelling something in the background that sounded like a wounded animal. "What the hell's going on? Why is Vanessa's wedding canceled? The planner just called and said all the vendors are backing out." I leaned back in my chair, watching a seagull perch on the ledge outside my office window. Even from 30 floors up, that bird looked more dignified than the man currently hyperventilating into my ear. "Because you uninvited me, Gregory," I said calmly, like I was explaining basic math to a kindergartner. "And as it turns out, I own everything you booked for this little celebration." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the clock ticking on my office wall. Then Gregory made this choking sound like someone had just punched him in the solar plexus. You can't be serious, he finally managed. This is about your feelings getting hurt. You're going to ruin your sister-in-law's wedding because you're throwing some kind of tantrum. That word, tantrum, hit me like a slap in the face. The same dismissive language Claire had used in her text, the same condescending tone I'd been hearing from this family for years, like my legitimate anger at being betrayed and humiliated was just some childish outburst that reasonable adults should ignore. I'm completely serious, I replied, my voice still steady as a rock. You decided I wasn't worthy of attending a wedding I paid for? I decided that if I'm not good enough to be a guest, then maybe this celebration shouldn't happen at all. But Ethan, Gregory pleaded, and now I could hear genuine desperation creeping into his voice. This will destroy Vanessa. She's been planning this for over a year. All our relatives are flying in from across the country. Should have thought about that before you cut me out, I said, and hung up. The phone immediately started ringing again, but this time it was Mitchell, Dr. Mitchell Blake, the golden boy himself, probably calling to smooth things over with his charm and his medical degree and his natural assumption that everyone would just fall in line once he applied his considerable people skills to the situation. Ethan, man, I don't know what happened between you and the family, but we really need to fix this, he said the moment I picked up. His voice had that careful, measured tone doctors use when they're trying to calm down an agitated patient. I've got colleagues flying in from Chicago. My parents drove up from California yesterday, and Vanessa's cousins are already at the hotel. We can work through whatever this is, but we need the wedding to happen. Not my concern, Mitchell, I said, and I meant it. For all his faults, Mitchell had never been actively disrespectful to me. He'd just been oblivious to how his golden boy status made everyone else in the family feel invisible. Look, I get that you're upset about something, but surely we can find a compromise here. What's it going to take to make this right? Wait, I said, genuinely curious now. Are you telling me you don't even know what your fiancée and her family did? They didn't bother to fill you in on their little plan? What plan? Ethan, I'm completely lost here. All I know is that our wedding is apparently canceled, and somehow you're involved. I almost felt sorry for the guy. Here he was, thinking he was marrying into a normal family with normal problems, completely unaware that his future in-laws had just declared war on the man who'd been quietly bankrolling their lifestyle for years. Ask your fiancée, I said. Ask her to explain why I got uninvited from a wedding I paid $50,000 for. Ask her why her family thought it was a good idea to keep my money while kicking me to the curb. There was another pause, longer this time. When Mitchell spoke again, his tone had shifted. Gone was the calm doctor voice. Now he just sounded confused and uneasy. You paid for the wedding? I thought Vanessa said her parents were covering most of it. Nope, I said. That was me. $50,000 paid quietly because I thought I was helping family. Turns out I was just the fool in the story. Jesus, Mitchell muttered. I didn't know. If that's true, what they did is unforgivable. But Ethan, don't punish Vanessa for her family's mistakes. She's dreamed of this day her whole life. Then maybe she should have picked a family that knows how to treat people decently, I said. Wait, are you telling me you actually own all the vendors? The venue, the catering, everything? Check the paperwork, Mitchell. Every contract ties back to my companies. The fancy lodge, mine. The 5-star caterer you brag about, mine. Even the hotel where your guests are staying, also mine. He went quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then came a slow, shaky breath. Holy hell, Ethan, you're not just some small business guy, are you? Not even close, I said, and for the first time that day I smiled. The calls started pouring in, one after another. I put my phone on silent, but it kept lighting up. Gregory calling again, Linda crying in voicemails, Vanessa's number flashing like a flare. Then Diana called back, her voice tense and worn. She sounded like someone who'd just spent an hour tearing through her industry contact list and didn't like what she found. Mr. Caldwell, she said, weary but formal. I've been calling everyone I know, and I'm afraid I have bad news for the Stevens and Blake families. I leaned back in my chair, watching the sunlight spill across my office. Outside, Seattle kept moving like nothing was wrong, unaware that 2 families in the city were about to learn a brutal lesson about burning bridges. Let me guess, I said. No replacements for their date? It's worse, she sighed. There's nothing open anywhere in the Pacific Northwest. I've called every venue within 300 miles. Caterers, florists, photographers. The few that even have space are either totally unsuitable or... She hesitated. Well, they're also owned by your companies. That made me laugh. An honest, deep laugh. I'd spent years building Caldwell Enterprises, but never realized how much of the local wedding market I'd quietly taken over. It hadn't been on purpose, just smart investing. When a good business struggles, you buy it. Do that for 15 years, and apparently you end up owning most of the industry. What about out of state? I asked, curious. I tried California, Oregon, even Nevada, she said. The problem's the timing. 3 weeks out. Everything good's already booked. The few last-minute places left are... She paused again. Go ahead, Diana, I said. Don't hold back. They're not the kind of places where the Dr. Blake's guests would expect to attend a wedding, she said softly. We're talking VFW halls, community centers, maybe a diner that could clear some tables. Nothing that fits the original plan or guest count. I could hear the stress in her voice. Mr. Caldwell, she whispered, I've run out of options. Is there any possible way to save this? I let the silence linger for a moment, enjoying the rare feeling of full control. Actually, I said slowly, there's one way, but it's going to require them to swallow their pride. She inhaled sharply, desperate for hope. Anything. At this point, I think they'll agree to whatever you ask. Here's my offer, I said, slipping into my boardroom voice. They can use Timber Ridge Lodge. It's smaller, about an hour from the city, but it's beautiful. Mountain views, rustic charm, that nature luxury vibe everyone's into now. That sounds amazing, she said, relief rushing through her voice. I'm not done, I said. Guest list capped at 60, non-negotiable. Total price, $180,000, paid up front before anything starts. The silence on the line was absolute. Then Diana finally whispered, Sir, that's more than triple the original budget. It's also the cost of crossing the man who held the whole thing up, I said. And there are 2 more terms. First, my invitation must be reinstated, formally, with a written apology from Claire and her parents admitting how they treated me was wrong. Second, that apology gets read aloud at the reception in front of every guest, so no one forgets why this wedding almost didn't happen. 2 days later, I sat in the main conference room at Caldwell Hall, my company's private estate, which I rarely used for anything except serious business. The place was built to impress. High ceilings, oil paintings, and a huge mahogany table worth more than most people's cars. They came in one by one, like people walking to their own trial. Claire entered first, pale and uneasy. Her usual confidence was gone. Vanessa and Mitchell followed, then Gregory and Linda. The silence was heavy. These were the same people who'd spent years talking over me, ignoring what I said, treating me like I didn't exist. Now they were sitting in my room, surrounded by all the wealth and power they'd never really noticed before. I waited a full minute before I spoke. I'm here because family matters to me, I said evenly, even when family forgets that I matter too. Vanessa spoke first, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know you paid for everything. I leaned forward. And if you had, you'd have treated me like a person? Maybe invited the guy who funded your wedding. Claire squirmed, finally finding her voice. Ethan, I thought you'd understand. I just wanted to avoid more drama. Understand what? I said, calm but sharp. Being used? Being laughed at while you kept my money? No, Claire, I don't understand that. Then Mitchell did something unexpected. He stood, looked me straight in the eye, and said, Ethan, I'm sorry for all of us. What Claire and her family did was wrong. There's no excuse. I'd be proud if you'd come to our wedding, not because you paid for it, but as a friend and a man I respect. For the first time, someone from Claire's side actually listened instead of waiting to talk. They accepted my deal, all of it. Gregory paid the full $180,000, probably draining his savings. Claire and her parents signed a formal apology, and they agreed to make it public. 3 weeks later, I stood in the main hall at Timber Ridge Lodge, watching the setup for what turned into a beautiful, smaller wedding. 60 guests instead of 120. But every person there knew they were seeing something real. The ceremony was simple and elegant. Vanessa looked radiant, her tears gone, replaced with real joy. Mitchell carried himself with quiet strength. During the reception, he stood up with his glass raised. Before we go on, he said, I want to thank someone who made this day possible in ways most of you don't realize. Everyone turned to me. To Ethan Caldwell, Mitchell said, the man who showed us that humility isn't weakness. You didn't just fund this wedding, you rebuilt our family's integrity. Vanessa rose beside him, her eyes wet. Ethan, I owe you an apology. You've always been generous, and we answered that kindness with betrayal. I'm sorry and grateful, not just for what you did, but for reminding us how to treat people right. The applause was real. For the first time in 7 years, they actually saw me for who I was. Later, Claire came up to me. I didn't realize you had this much power, she whispered. You never cared to ask, I said, and walked away. The next morning, she showed up at my penthouse with flowers and pleading eyes. We can fix this, she said. 7 years means something, doesn't it? My bag was already packed. Claire, you weren't just quiet, you planned it. You helped shut me out and then acted like I was overreacting. But, Ethan, I'm done, I said, picking up my bag. Done with you, your family, and pretending that being disrespected is normal. My phone buzzed, a text from Mitchell with a photo of him and Vanessa cutting the cake. Under it, thank you. You are the real foundation of this celebration. I typed back, remember that. Don't ever betray the hand that builds your world. He replied right away, lesson learned. Thank you for showing us what real strength looks like. As the elevator doors closed behind me, Claire's voice echoed down the hall. I didn't turn around. I'd spent 7 years looking back. Now I was done. The elevator dropped toward the ground floor, carrying me forward, not as the uninvited husband or the family's wallet, but as the man who proved that silence isn't weakness, it's patience. And when quiet men finally move, the world shakes beneath them.